The airplane's cabin was a sanctuary of quiet luxury, miles above the earth, cocooned in a world far removed from daily worries. The low hum of the engines was a constant pulse, comforting yet detached, as the night stretched endlessly beyond the oval windows. Soft amber lighting bathed the seats in a warm glow, inviting rest, reflection, and a brief escape from reality. David Mercer lounged in his first-class seat near the front of the plane. To anyone watching, he appeared to have it all: a tailored navy suit, a sparkling watch, and a confident air that brooked no opposition. Business cards spilled from his leather briefcase, a testament to his success as a high-powered executive, with deals closing every hour. Yet beneath the polished exterior was a man fueled by ego, suspicion, and a hunger to prove himself better than everyone else, especially celebrities. Across the aisle, in a modest black hoodie that defied the lavish surroundings, sat a man David recognized immediately. The tabloids called him a star, but David didn't buy the glamour. Keanu Reeves, a name synonymous with Hollywood fame, cult films, and endless paparazzi fodder. But on this night, Keanu was nothing more than a quiet passenger, headphones resting around his neck, eyes focused on a small book in his lap. David's lips curled into a sardonic smile. What's a movie star doing on this flight, pretending to be one of us? He thought, his pride already chafing against the humility in Keanu's demeanor. As the flight attendants circulated, David seized an opportunity. "Hey, Reeves." His voice was loud enough to turn a few heads. "Still living off your old hits? When's the next big blockbuster? Or is it easier to coast on past glory?" Keanu looked up slowly, meeting David's gaze. His eyes were calm, not angry but carrying an unmistakable depth, a softness that made David's insults sound hollow even to himself. "I'm not here to perform," Keanu said quietly, "just passing through like you." David scoffed and turned away, but a strange discomfort settled over him. Why hadn't Keanu snapped back? Why had he chosen silence over confrontation? The stewardess, a woman with kind eyes and a serene smile, paused nearby. She had noticed the tension. "Sometimes," she said gently, "the strongest people don't need to shout to be heard." David dismissed her words as nonsense, but couldn't shake the unease. Hours passed. The sky outside darkened into a velvet blanket sprinkled with stars. Passengers drifted off to sleep or absorbed themselves in screens, cocooned in their own worlds. David, however, remained restless. His mind wandered back to Keanu, who was now quietly folding a small blanket around a child asleep in the seat beside him. The boy's face lit up with trust and comfort in Keanu's gentle care. David's irritation melted into curiosity. As if reading his thoughts, the stewardess approached again, her voice low. "Mr. Mercer, you may not know, but Mr. Reeves has spent the last several months quietly volunteering with victims of the wildfire that devastated the city below. Not on the news, not for headlines, just real work, real healing." David blinked. "Really?" His tone was skeptical but tinged with something unfamiliar. "Respect." The stewardess nodded. "Sometimes the quietest acts are the most powerful." David swallowed a lump of pride. Maybe he had judged too quickly. The plane was still, hours from its destination when the captain's voice cut through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will experience some turbulence shortly. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." As the plane shuddered through the first bumps, a sudden scream pierced the air. The child Keanu had been comforting cried out, frightened by the sudden jolt. Without hesitation, Keanu removed his headphones, steadied the boy, and spoke softly. "It's okay, you're safe." David watched, surprised by the calm authority in Keanu's voice. When the turbulence passed, a slow realization dawned on David. This man he had mocked carried a strength far beyond his own. That night, as the flight settled back into quiet, David's thoughts were troubled. The world he thought he knew, of celebrities as mere entertainers and of himself as always right, suddenly felt much smaller. Who was Keanu Reeves really? What truths lay hidden behind that calm exterior? And what could David learn from a man who wore humility like a cloak? The steady rhythm of the engines was a comforting constant in the night, but inside David Mercer's mind, turbulence raged on. He sat rigidly in his seat, eyes occasionally darting toward the man he had so easily dismissed, Keanu Reeves. What had the stewardess said? That Keanu was quietly helping wildfire victims? David couldn't reconcile the gentle, almost fragile man comforting a scared child with the tabloid caricature of a self-absorbed movie star. Curiosity gnawed at him, a feeling foreign and unsettling. For the first time in a long while, David felt humbled. The flight attendants had dimmed the cabin lights further, encouraging passengers to rest. But David found sleep impossible. His thoughts circled endlessly, wondering who Keanu really was, beyond the headlines. He looked at the small book Keanu had been reading earlier. It was a worn copy of Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl's memoir of survival and hope amid unimaginable suffering. That choice seemed deliberate, a symbol. Perhaps David's attention was pulled away by soft voices from the galley area. The stewardess was speaking quietly with Keanu. He strained to listen. "We've been coordinating efforts on the ground, families displaced, children without shelter. You've made a real difference, but no press. Just doing what's right," the stewardess said. Keanu nodded. "I don't want the spotlight on this. If it were about fame, I'd never have stayed so quiet." David felt a surge of respect mixed with confusion. Who was this man who rejected glory for genuine impact? Later, as the plane glided above the clouds, an unexpected announcement jolted the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're preparing for an emergency landing due to a technical issue. Please remain calm and fasten your seatbelts." Panic rippled through the first-class cabin. The sleek environment suddenly felt fragile and vulnerable. David's heart pounded. He had never imagined himself scared on a plane. His arrogance seemed petty compared to the reality of uncertainty. Keanu remained calm. His presence was steady and reassuring as he quietly offered words of comfort to anxious passengers. David noticed how naturally people gravitated toward him, drawn by an unspoken strength. The plane descended sharply and the emergency landing was rough but successful. The aircraft came to rest on a remote airstrip surrounded by dense forest. The passengers were shaken but safe. Outside, the cold night air hit them like a wave. The airline arranged for blankets and water, but the isolation was palpable. David looked around, feeling small in a way unfamiliar to him. The first time in years he was not the center of attention or control. As people gathered near the emergency exit, Keanu quietly moved through the crowd, helping where needed. He assisted a mother comforting her frightened baby, shared his jacket with a shivering elderly man, and encouraged the children to stay positive. David found himself standing beside Keanu, drawn by curiosity and something else, a growing sense of humility. "You've been doing a lot more than I thought," David admitted quietly. Keanu glanced at him, eyes reflecting exhaustion and resolve. "Most people don't want to see the hard parts. They prefer the glossy version." David nodded slowly, ashamed of his earlier judgment. "Why do you do it? Why stay so quiet?" David asked. Keanu took a deep breath. "Because real change doesn't need an audience. Sometimes the world's biggest battles are fought in silence, away from the cameras." David's mind flooded with memories, his own battles with loneliness, pressure, and fear hidden behind his confident mask. For the first time, he saw Keanu not as a celebrity, but as a human being, flawed, courageous, and compassionate. As the night deepened, David and Keanu talked quietly under the stars. Keanu shared stories of his time with wildfire survivors, how children had lost their homes, how families struggled to rebuild, and how small acts of kindness could ignite hope. David shared his own story too, his relentless pursuit of success, the loneliness that came with it, and the emptiness beneath the surface. They found common ground in vulnerability and resilience. Meanwhile, the passengers began to gather near the temporary shelter the airline set up. The mood shifted from panic to solidarity. David realized this night was not just a test of survival, but a turning point, an opportunity to shed pride and embrace empathy. As the emergency teams prepared for the morning rescue, David looked at Keanu again. The man he had insulted hours earlier was now someone he deeply admired. The truth had been revealed, not just about Keanu's quiet heroism, but about the strength it took to live with kindness in a world that often rewarded anything. But the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold. The cold air outside the emergency shelter was sharp and crisp, but it carried with it a sense of calm that had been absent the night before. Passengers were slowly stirring from a restless sleep on hastily arranged cots and blankets. The airline staff and emergency responders worked quietly but efficiently, coordinating transportation and assistance for the stranded travelers. David Mercer woke to the unfamiliar sound of distant birds and the gentle murmur of conversations. The events of the previous night played in his mind like a film. His harsh words, Keanu's quiet dignity, the emergency landing, and the small moments of compassion that had quietly changed him. David sat up and stretched, feeling the ache of humility settling in his chest. For a man who had built his life on control and power, the past 12 hours had shattered many of his assumptions. He glanced around the shelter, seeing faces he hadn't noticed before, young parents holding hands tightly, elderly couples sharing, warmth, children playing despite the uncertainty. In this fragile community, the usual social barriers dissolved, and at the center of it all was Keanu Reeves. David watched as Keanu moved among the people, helping to distribute blankets, listening intently to those who spoke, offering comfort and reassurance. The crowd naturally gravitated toward him, not because of fame, but because of genuine kindness. Summoning his courage, David approached Keanu. "Can I talk to you?" he asked quietly. Keanu nodded, his calm gaze inviting. They stepped away from the crowd to a quieter corner. David struggled to find the right words. "I owe you an apology," he began. "I was wrong to judge you so quickly. Seeing you last night, it made me realize how little I really knew." Keanu smiled gently. "Thank you, David. That means more than you know." The two men sat down on a fallen log, the morning sun warming their backs. Keanu shared stories from his volunteer work, how he'd witnessed the best and worst of humanity in the wildfire's aftermath, and how hope could flourish even in the darkest times. "People often think heroism has to be loud and grand," Keanu said softly. "But sometimes the quietest acts are the most powerful. Sitting with someone who's lost everything, holding their hand when they cry, that's real strength." David listened, absorbing every word. The man he had mocked was teaching him a lesson that no business deal or trophy could provide. They talked. Other passengers gathered nearby, overhearing fragments of their conversation. A woman with tear-filled eyes approached and thanked Keanu for his kindness to her family during the crisis. Another man, a firefighter off duty, nodded in respect. The atmosphere shifted from fear to solidarity. David realized something profound. This moment wasn't about status or wealth, but about connection. Later, as emergency crews prepared to transport the passengers to nearby shelters, David found himself beside Keanu again. "Would you mind if I joined your volunteer group?" David asked, surprising even himself. Keanu's eyes lit up. "We'd welcome you." The flight had started as a simple journey but had become a transformative experience. David's walls were breaking down, replaced by a growing desire to live with purpose beyond ambition and ego. Keanu's quiet heroism had revealed the power of empathy and kindness, lessons David was ready to carry forward. As the passengers boarded buses to safety, David and Keanu exchanged a firm handshake, not of celebrity and fan, but of two humans bound by shared understanding. In that moment, the first-class cabin felt like a distant memory, replaced by a new journey, one toward humility, compassion, and true strength. The buses rumbled along winding mountain roads, ferrying the displaced passengers from the makeshift airstrip toward the nearest town. The atmosphere inside was somber but tinged with a newfound sense of community. Strangers who had barely exchanged words just hours ago now shared stories, hopes, and silent nods of encouragement. David Mercer sat by the window, watching the scenery blur past, towering pines, rushing streams, and distant mountains bathed in soft sunlight. but his mind was far from the landscape outside. He thought about the journey he'd begun, a path that stretched far beyond this emergency flight. The truth about Keanu Reeves and his quiet courage had cracked open something inside David that no amount of success or recognition had ever touched. Beside him, Keanu sat quietly, his presence steady and comforting. They had spent the past hours planning how David could join the ongoing relief efforts. The wildfire had devastated entire communities, homes lost, families uprooted, livelihoods destroyed. "This is just the beginning," Keanu said softly. "There's so much to do." David nodded, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and humility. He was ready to face a world beyond boardrooms and first-class cabins, a world where real work was messy, hard, and sometimes heartbreaking. When they arrived at the relief center, the scale of the devastation became painfully clear. Volunteers hurried back and forth, unloading supplies, setting up tents, and offering medical aid. The scent of smoke still lingered in the air. David felt a lump in his throat as he saw families huddled together, eyes weary but grateful. Children clung to stuffed animals, clutching the fragile remnants of normalcy. Keanu greeted familiar faces, his reputation among the local volunteers evident. But he moved among them as one of many, never seeking special treatment. David's first task was to assist with distributing food and water. It was simple work, but for a man who had spent his life wielding influence, it was a humbling experience. He listened carefully to stories of loss, resilience, and hope, voices that spoke of strength far greater than any he had known in corporate boardrooms. A woman approached him, her eyes bright despite the hardship. "Thank you for helping," she said. "It means more than you know." David realized then that kindness, no matter how small, had the power to heal. Days passed, and David's involvement deepened. He helped set up temporary shelters, organized supply chains, and even comforted families struggling to rebuild. Through it all, Keanu remained a constant source of inspiration. He shared not just his time but his heart, listening to stories, holding hands in silence, and reminding everyone that hope could be found even in the darkest moments. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, David and Keanu sat outside the relief center. The sky was painted in fiery shades of orange and purple. "I never imagined this would be my life," David admitted. Keanu smiled. "Life has a way of surprising us. Sometimes it takes losing everything to find what truly matters." David reflected on his past arrogance, the walls he had built around himself, and the profound change that had begun. "I want to keep doing this," he said. "Not for fame or recognition, but because it feels right." Keanu placed a hand on David's shoulder. "That's the start of real redemption." As stars emerged overhead, David felt a deep sense of peace. The man he had once insulted had become his guide, not just to helping others, but to understanding himself. Meanwhile, news of the emergency landing and Keanu's quiet heroism began to spread. Passengers shared their stories on social media, capturing the essence of a man who had chosen kindness over celebrity. David watched the reactions, messages of admiration, surprise, and inspiration, and knew that the true story was only beginning. In the days ahead, David would face new challenges, rebuilding communities, confronting his own doubts, and learning what it truly meant to be brave. But with Keanu's example lighting the way, he was ready to walk the path of compassion and courage, a journey that no flight, no matter how first class, could ever offer. The days stretched into weeks. The wildfire's scars remained visible, charred earth, collapsed homes, and barren fields. But so did the signs of resilience, sprouts of green pushing through blackened soil, children's laughter echoing amid the rubble, and a community slowly stitching itself back together. David Mercer had immersed himself fully in the relief efforts. His days began before dawn and ended long after the sun set, filled with tasks he had never imagined undertaking: clearing debris, rebuilding fences, coordinating supplies, and most importantly, listening. Despite the physical exhaustion, what weighed heaviest was the emotional toll. Every face told a story of loss and hope, of pain and perseverance, and sometimes the sheer depth of human suffering overwhelmed him. One afternoon, David found himself sitting quietly beside a young girl named Lily. She clutched a worn teddy bear, her eyes distant. "What happened to your home?" David asked gently. Lily looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. "It burned down. Everything is gone." David felt a lump form in his throat. "I'm so sorry." She nodded, then added with surprising strength, "But my family is safe. We have each other." It was moments like these, fragile, honest, and raw, that reminded David why this journey mattered. The lessons Keanu had taught him were no longer abstract ideals but lived realities. But even as David grew stronger, doubt crept in. Could one person truly make a difference amid such devastation? Was his newfound purpose enough to heal the wounds so deep? One evening, exhausted and discouraged, David sat alone outside the relief center. The stars above twinkled silently, indifferent to human struggles below. Keanu found him there and sat down beside him. "You're carrying a heavy weight," Keanu said softly. David sighed. "Sometimes I wonder if it's enough, if any of this is enough." Keanu nodded, understanding etched on his face. Change rarely comes overnight, but every small act, every kind word, builds toward something greater. He paused, then shared a story from his own past, a time when he had faced rejection and doubt but chose to persevere. "It's okay to feel weak," Keanu said. "What matters is that you keep moving forward." Renewed by Keanu's words, David decided to take on a new challenge, organizing a community gathering to bring hope and healing through connection. He worked tirelessly, coordinating with local leaders, volunteers, and survivors. The event was simple. Stories shared around a fire, music, laughter, and a collective moment of remembrance and renewal. The night of the gathering arrived. People from all walks of life came together, united by shared experience and determination to rebuild. David stood before the crowd, heart pounding. He began by telling his own story, from arrogance and judgment to humility and compassion. He spoke of the man he had insulted on a flight, and how that encounter had transformed his life. His words resonated deeply, and as he spoke, tears filled many eyes. Keanu joined him on stage, and together, they led the crowd in a moment of silence, honoring loss, celebrating survival, and embracing hope. The night ended with songs of joy and resilience, lighting up the darkness like a beacon. For David, the event marked a turning point. It was no longer about the mistakes of the past or the uncertainty of the future. It was about community, connection, and the courage to keep believing in the good. As the fire's embers glowed warmly, David realized that this was the true meaning of redemption, not a destination but a journey walked one step at a time with open heart and steady faith. The community gathering had been a profound turning point for David Mercer, but it was also just the beginning. What started as a simple act of bringing people together around a fire grew into something much larger, a movement of healing, rebuilding, and renewed hope. David found himself stepping into a role he never anticipated, not as a CEO or a public figure, but as a leader born from experience, empathy, and an authentic desire to serve. The wildfire had changed everything. Entire neighborhoods had been lost, but the spirit of those affected burned brighter than ever. Inspired by the gathering's success, David and Keanu began working closely with local officials, aid organizations, and volunteers to develop long-term recovery plans. Their efforts focused not only on physical reconstruction, but also on emotional and mental health support for survivors. One morning, as David walked through the town's makeshift community center, he saw firsthand the impact of their work. Families gathered to share meals, children played in safe spaces, and counselors offered gentle guidance to those struggling with trauma. Mural was being painted on a battered wall, vibrant colors depicting phoenixes rising from ashes, symbolizing rebirth. David paused, overwhelmed by the resilience surrounding him. Keanu approached, smiling warmly. "You're doing something remarkable here." David shook his head, humbled. "I'm just one part of a much bigger story." Keanu's eyes sparkled. Sometimes one person's willingness to change can inspire an entire community. But leadership was not without its challenges. Bureaucracy, limited resources, and the lingering trauma of loss complicated every decision. David found himself confronting moments of frustration, doubt, and fatigue. One evening, after a particularly long day negotiating with officials, he sat, alone in his small temporary office. The weight of responsibility pressed down heavily. A text message from Keanu popped up. "Remember why you started. We're in this together." Those words rekindled David's resolve. He stood, taking a deep breath, and looked out the window at the starry sky. A vast canvas of possibility. Determined, David organized a series of community workshops aimed at empowering survivors to take an active role in rebuilding their neighborhoods. These workshops covered everything from construction skills to mental wellness techniques, fostering a sense of ownership and hope. During one workshop, David met Sarah, a single mother who had lost her home, but was fiercely committed to rebuilding not just for her family but for her neighbors. Her determination inspired David deeply. Together, they spearheaded neighborhood cleanup efforts and advocated for faster infrastructure repairs. Meanwhile, Keanu continued to quietly support the efforts, using his influence to raise awareness and gather resources without seeking the spotlight. His humility and steadfast presence reminded David that true leadership was rooted in service, not recognition. As weeks turned into months, the town began to transform. Broken houses were replaced by new homes, community gardens bloomed where ashes once lay, and laughter returned to the streets. David's own journey mirrored this transformation. He shed old layers of arrogance and fear, embracing vulnerability and strength in equal measure. One afternoon, as the sun cast golden light over the town, David stood on a newly built porch with Sarah and several neighbors. They watched children, playing freely, their smiles radiant. Sarah turned to David and said, "You came here as a stranger, now you're part of our family." David smiled, emotion welling up inside him. "I'm honored to walk this path with you all," he replied. In that moment, David understood that redemption was not just personal, it was collective. It was about rising beyond past mistakes, lifting others up, and forging new futures from the ashes. As night fell, David and Keanu sat quietly beneath the stars. "No matter where life takes us," Keanu said softly, "this place will always remind us of what courage and kindness can achieve." David nodded, filled with gratitude and hope. The journey was far from over, but he now faced the future not with fear, but with unwavering faith in the power of the human spirit. The town had transformed in ways that once seemed impossible. Where ash and ruin had dominated the landscape, now stood a vibrant community, woven together by shared struggle and unyielding hope. The wildfire was no longer just a symbol of destruction. It had become a catalyst for renewal. David Mercer stood at the heart of this rebirth, no longer just a visitor or a helper, but a beloved member of a community that had become family. Yet, as much as the external world had changed, the most profound shifts had taken place within David himself. He had journeyed from judgment and ignorance to humility and empathy. The man who once insulted a stranger on a plane had learned the true meaning of kindness, perseverance, and the power of connection. One crisp morning, as the sun rose over the rolling hills, David stood before a newly dedicated community center. The building was modest but full of warmth, designed to be a hub for education, healing, and hope. Local leaders, survivors, and volunteers gathered, faces alight with pride and gratitude. David stepped forward to speak. His voice was steady but filled with emotion. "When this journey began, I had no idea where it would lead," he said. "What I do know is this: the strength I see here, in every one of you, is the true miracle. It's the courage to keep going, The kindness to lift each other up and the hope that no matter how dark the night, the dawn will come. He paused, letting his words sink in. This center is more than bricks and mortar. It's a symbol of our resilience. A place where stories are shared, wounds are healed, and futures are built. The crowd erupted in applause. Among the attendees was Lily, the young girl with the teddy bear, now smiling brightly and full of life. David knelt beside her and whispered, "You remind me every day why this work matters." Lily beamed. "We all have a story, don't we?" David nodded. "And together our stories create a new beginning." In the weeks that followed, the community center blossomed into a beacon of possibility. Workshops, support groups, and celebrations filled its halls. David continued to lead, not as a distant figure, but as a friend and partner, always listening, learning and growing alongside those he served. Meanwhile, Keanu's presence remained a quiet but powerful force. His celebrity had opened doors and hearts, but he never sought attention for himself. Instead, he focused on amplifying voices that needed to be heard and reminding everyone that true heroism lies in everyday acts of courage. One evening, David and Keanu sat beneath a canopy of stars reflecting on the extraordinary journey they had shared. "Look how far we've come," David said, his voice soft with awe. Keanu smiled. "The journey never really ends. It just takes new forms." They spoke of the future, of continuing to spread messages of hope, resilience, and compassion far beyond the boundaries of that small town. For David, the transformation was complete. The regret he once felt had blossomed into a lifelong commitment to kindness and leadership. As dawn broke over the horizon, David understood that his story, the story of a man who had once insulted a stranger and then been forever changed, was not just about redemption. It was about the power each of us holds to heal, to connect, and to light the way for others. And so, with hearts full and spirits unbroken, they set forth into a new day, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. Because in every act of kindness, in every courageous choice, the legacy of light continues to grow.